Okay, so before we start making our textures, let's talk a little bit about the language we're going to be using to make those. So the language itself is based on a very old computer language named Forth, which was invented by Charles Moore in the 1970s. So if you want to know more, you can look it up. The language itself is probably the most simple computer language there is. It has no syntax. You make your own syntax in this language, and it looks a lot like a natural language. So you can describe things like sphere is concrete and is shiny, whatever that means, shiny. And the language itself uses reverse Polish notation, and it uses stacks to hold data. So let's talk a little bit about the reverse Polish notation. So normally when you type an operation, you type, let's say, 1 plus 1 with the operand goes in the middle of the operation. Now with reverse Polish notation, you type 1 1 and then plus. The operand goes last. Now this is very useful since it helps us clarify the whatever we're talking about. So for example, imagine trying to describe a texture using this notation here. You would have to say texture and then call a parameter and then another one or many more. Now with Forth, the advantage we have is that it maps one-to-one to our node-based workflow for textures. So you could say texture, and before you would have typed the parameter, so parameter texture. Now you can make it look a lot like natural language, like how I made. Another advantage this language has is that you can make your own words. So let's take our previous example, the 1 1 plus, and let me run it again. So it has a 2, but this time I want to make this into a word. So let's call this word X, and I start with a semicolon, then the name of the word and the whatever it contains, this word, whatever instructions they have. So I say 1 1 and then plus, and now X equals 1 1 plus, that is 2. So I could say X and let me run it with F5, and you can see it's 2. The answer is here. Now that 2 is on the stack. That means whatever we call next will go on top of that. So that would mean like a first in and then first out stack, which is a very simple structure, and that's all we use to talk to a computer. So we could say X, X, and then X, and then a plus. Now if you have some sort of intuition of what this will do, this will give us 4 and then a 2 on the stack. So let's see, and we have a 4, which was the sum of these two x's and then the x that was left. So I could just type another plus, and now we have 6 because we added these two 4s, these two 2's, and then another 2 here. Now, as you can see, this is just a single line of what we would call code, right? But if you were to type this, to make this in Python, you will have to say def x, and then let's say whatever parameter you want to pass to x, and then you have to say return 1 plus 1. That will be your Python definition. By default it takes 2 lines. So this is the syntax of Forth. We define our own words, we control the computer in our own terms. So we could map whatever we want in Blender to this language. You could make it not only for textures, you can make it control whatever practically you want. and it's very simple to extend. Okay, so you have seen me type things in our little fourth, the 1 plus, and this little pound sign. So the pound sign is just there so we get a sort of debug message. So if I were to run it without the pound, it will run, but it will say nothing. I'm pressing F5, it's doing nothing. So the pound is basically our debugger. It will stop the execution of whatever is running, and it will display the stack on the screen as an error message. Of course, it's not an error message, but it's very handy. The display will show whatever your mouse is. So if you are here, or if you are here, it will show. And with the pound sign, we can debug whatever we want. So let's say we type our X again, so 1, and now I want to debug that 1, and then something like this. So my debugger is here. So that means it will just put 1 on the stack and then stop. So let me just run it here. Let me do X and then run it. See, 1 on the stack. If I put the debugger here and I run it, it will say 1 on the stack. If I say that this is a 2 now, I will say 1 2 on the stack. Now this debugger is just a part of the language that I made. It's not a standard of Forth, but I think it's very useful to have a single word debugger, and I don't think you can debug like that in Python, so it's very easy to solve whatever problem you have. Okay, so how about I run you through a little bit of an example now. So for an artist, all this thing about programming, it could be a little bit intimidating, but this is just 10 lines of code, of Forth code. And in 10 lines, we can make a texture that looks like this. And you can see, let me show you the shader tree. It's very nice, it's very ordered, but it's also somewhat complex. So it would be, well, it would be a little bit of a pain to make manually, especially since you are searching for all the textures and so. So let me break it through just a little bit for you. Okay, so the first part of our workflow begins with selecting things to work on. So first, I just type the name of what I want to select. Let me run it. And you can see it's just a name on the stack with a star. So the star matches whatever it has this name here. So if you can see here in the navigator, you can see that it says Lion low res and Lion high res, so it will match whatever has low res. So if I type the word select and then run it, you can see it gave me a BPY data object. That means this object here. So now I have a reference of that on the stack. Now I don't have to do anything. I can just do a solo to make it the only thing visible, or I can just start and do an init mat. That means initialize the material. Now if I initialize the material, it looks like this because it has nothing. It has no output. So the next step would be to select a material. First I name the material. So if when you download, you can see the names in the library. It has about 700 materials or so. It's about 20 gig. So I just type the name of the material, asphalt _ 00, and I type the word mat, which will give me a material. Now let me see here. Let me type that, and now you can see the nodes are here, but they are disordered. They're all connected, but they are disordered, and I can see nothing here. So I made a word, a special debugger that puts the word out and then a debugger. So the word out will just connect the output of this shader into the output for this mesh. So if I do that, you can see that it says output here, and we can see our texture, and the debugger stops the execution of anything that goes ahead. or you could just type the pound and the capital O. Same result. Of course, now that I have the material applied, I can just switch and add a different material, let's say asphalt 01. And now you can see it's a different type of asphalt material. I could say asphalt 02, run it, and it's a much finer type of material. But let's leave it at asphalt 00. And now I like this kind of look. Okay, so next up will be changing the color of the material. Now, normally in Blender you would come here, let's see, here in the diffuse, and you would type add in a ramp or a color mixer. Now, with here I made a special kind of syntax that does that stuff for us. It's very simple. You type a D and a bracket, an open bracket, and this isolates your diffuse channel. So if I type the output debugger here, you can see we have our diffuse, and we can see it here in our shader editor. And this is somewhat intuitive. You can say D for diffuse, S for specular roughness, N for normal, M for metal. It's very simple. Now I am editing the diffuse, so I am doing a red -5, which is a color. So let me show you the color, how it looks, and it doesn't look red at all. That's because I'm using palette matching. So as you can see here, I am loading a file called Bonifacio palette. Bonifacio is just the name of this HDR, which I made a palette of, and I'm going to show you how to do that in future videos. It's very simple. So red -5 color matches the red -5 RGB to a palette. So if I get this, you can see that red -5 is this type of red. But since I'm using the word color, CLR, it matches to this color here. Now, I want to make it a little bit lighter, so I say 35% light. And let's see how that one looks. Now it's 35% lighter. And you can see here in the shader editor that we have our color and we have our white, and you can see how it changes. So it has white and it has a mixer which says 0.35, meaning the 35%. And I want to mix it, so I just say mix over. So let me show you. Say something like this, and now our shader editor changes immediately to have an overlay mixing. You can see it's kind of dull, and it's add a little bit of color to our diffuse texture. And I finally end the diffuse editing by using a close bracket. So let's see how it looks. And we have our diffuse a little bit changed. So let's see how it looks from here. And it's a little bit more saturated. Now let's continue with our walkthrough. So let's do our specular now. I think this is a bit too shiny to, well, let's see how the specular looks for this. I think it's too shiny. Let's see, it's almost, I think the roughness is the white and the shininess is in black, so it's kind of spotted. So it makes sense since concrete, since the asphalt is supposed to be somewhat a little bit shiny, but I want it more dark. I don't like it too shiny. So I have 80 gray, which is a color, and I have color, so I want to match the palette. And let's see, it's almost white. So an almost white, and if I check the normal color with RGB, you can see there's not much of a difference. This one is a little bit more saturated, So let's see again. See, yeah, you can see it's a little bit more saturated. And if we see here, let's see the HSV, it's a little bit saturated, not great at all. So I want to mix it over. Same thing. Now you can see some dark spots, but that's okay, I like it like that. And that's all for my specular. So let's see how the material looks. And it's a little bit more saturated and a little bit more matte. So let me compare it with the first without edits. Let's see. You can see it's a little bit more shiny with more reflections, and the color is a little bit bluish. Well, not bluish, but rather cool. And now with our fixes, it's more matte and it's a little bit more in line with our scene here. So let's move on to the next material. Okay, so for the next material I want a rust. So it will be a grime, but it says rust, but it's not. I'm not going to use it as a rust because this is not metallic, and I have to put the debugger after the matte. So this is how a rust looks. So it's metallic, okay, but I think this statue is made of stone, so I want to make it look like it's dirt instead of metal rust. So first I come here in my diffuse and let's see how it looks. Looks red. Of course, no grime is that red. So I'm just going to use desat to desaturate it. And we can see now it's a dull gray. You can see it put a desaturate node in here. And I want to mix it so it looks somewhat grimy. I think it should look something like these shadows in here, this little bit of dark color. So I have 10% light. Let's see how it looks. And it looks very light, very light, despite it's just 10%. Let's see. Okay, so it's correct, it's 10% light. I think it's too light, but I like it like that. Let's see, and now I'm going to use orange -3 color, which gives us a color that looks like this. It's kind of a tan color. I think it's very similar to this color here. I think the palette picked up this color. And let me see how it looks with RGB again, so you can see the difference. Now it looks like this. So it had this color and then searched the image for the palette, and it found this tan color here. And again, I'll mix it over. Let's see how that looks. And perfect. Yeah, I like this color. If I compare it, it looks something like this color here. So the color of dirt, which I like. So let me see how this rust looks. And it looks dirt. Looks like dirt. And I like this specular, so I'm going to leave it like that. It's kind of like spotty, like dust specular. So I like that. So let's see. Next, let's make a mask. Okay, now I'm going to introduce you a new word and a new workflow for making masks. So first, I take the name of a material, but this time instead of calling a matte, I call a demask. D for diffuse, so it will take the diffuse map of that material and bring it up as a mask. So let me show you how it looks. I put up my debugger and it looks like this. So the steel 03, the diffuse map looks like this, and I mapped a ramp to it so I can use some words to manipulate it. So It's very handy. Now, what are these words? I made some words named the contrast words. So we have low dash con, mid dash con, high dash con, v high dash con, and v low dash con. Can you tell what this word means? So v low dash con, it means very low contrast. Low con means low contrast, mid contrast, high contrast, very high contrast. And this word takes a midpoint. So let's say the midpoint will be 0.5. So it will affect this ramp here. So the midpoint would be around here, so something like this. It will look something like this. And the high contrast will mean the distance between the ramp, between the 2 points of the ramp. So let's see how it looks. I put my debugger, and it's very similar to what I showed you it would look like. It's very nice. So it's if I say 0.1, the midpoint will be around 0.1, and it will look like this. It doesn't look like anything because it doesn't have enough data for that contrast. I mean, the map doesn't have enough data. So you can see that the data starts appearing around 0.3 here, you can see, to around 0.8, 0.7. So I think that 0.5 is the correct one. So let me just run it again. And if you want to see how it looks with other contrast, let me type it, mid con, and you can see that it has more gray areas. So it's very useful, so you don't have to start twiddling your ramps and just forget what the hell did you do. Or you can just say low con. For low contrast, you see more gray. Or you can just go very high contrast, like so. And you can see it's just black and white, because if we see here, the difference between the ramps is just about 0.01. So it's just black and white with no gray. But I wanted high con, just a little bit of gray. Now let's look at this pattern. We can see that it's repeating a lot, but I want something that's less repeatable. So I'm going to use another word I made, the scale word, SCL, and it works pretty much the same as the contrast words. It takes a number before the word, and if I run it, let's see, if I put my debugger here and run it, you can see that it scaled it and it's now bigger. So let's move here, and you can see that it changed the scale to 0.1 in X, 0.1 in Y, and in Z. Now if I change something like this, it looks, well, it messes the thing up, because all three scales have to be the same number for it to look, or for it to look okay. So 0.1 scale, I could might as well type 0.5 scale, and you can see it's a different scale. And there are other words such as rotation, which rotates our image, and so let me put it 0, or location, which translates the plane of the triplanar projection. So let me just set this as 0. You can watch another video for this. I'll be making one just for these three transforms. But let's move on. Now I have this very nice mask here, looks 0.1. I want this mask here because it has a very nice rough like patch here in the elbow and in the side, and it looks, I like the look of it. So I'm just going to mix it up. I could type the word mix and our output, and it mixes the two materials, the rust material and our asphalt material. But I want to keep working on this mask. Okay, so let's continue with our texture. Let me remove this mix, and next up we have this word mask AO, which generates an ambient occlusion mask. So let me just run that, and it's just a mix from Blender's ambient occlusion shader and a baked ambient occlusion map I made using the same workflow. And it has a ramp, so we can use the contrast words like so. So 0.2 low con, and you can see that now we have more contrast in the areas, in the crevices. So the same way we did a mix over here, now we do a mix mole. Of course the mix mole will be mixing with the previous mask, with this one. So let's just see how it looks. And you can see they're multiplied one on top of the other. And next up is an invert word, which just inverts our whatever we have here. And that's pretty much it for our mask. So let's continue to the final part with the mix. Now before we go into mix, let me show you the stack here. You can see that there's two BSDF, BSDF and BSDF 001, and then the last node, the invert, which corresponds to the first texture, the asphalt, the second texture, the rust, and now the final texture, the mask. So mix takes three nodes, the first material, the second material, and then the mask. So let's see how it looks. And it's not too bad. It looks kind of dirty, and it has dirt in the crevices, just like I want it. So far I like it. And let's see our final shader tree. And here's our mask, here's our first texture, and here's our second texture. And they all connect to this mix node here. So that's pretty much it. I think we should jump into more advanced stuff next. So I'll see you there.